Hey everyone, welcome back. I will be embarking on a series about A-levels and sharing with you the tips on how I studied for each subject. Today I'll be sharing with you the methods and tips that I use to do well for A-level physics. So just some background information about myself. I took the A-levels in Singapore between 2017 to 2018, and these are the subjects that I took. So I took PCME, which is H2 Physics, Chemistry, Maths, Econs, as well as all the other H1, which are project work, general paper, which I was really bad, as well as H1 Chinese. So I studied for H2 Physics between 2017 to 2018, and on my results day, which was in year 2019, I got an A grade, which is the highest possible for Singapore A-levels. Over here, you will see the timeline on this video. First up, I'll be sharing with you my results from the start of school all the way until A-levels, some study tips, as well as my overall feelings about physics. There'll be timestamps in the description below, so if you want to skip to any part, just feel free to skip to it. So over here, you see my results from my J1, which is my year 1, all the way up to A-levels. So overall, I got consistently an A, and as well as a decently high percentile, with 100 percentile being the cohort best. And overall for A-levels, I also achieved an A grade. Now I'm just putting these results out so that I can perhaps add some credibility to the tips that I'm sharing. So now if you don't want to watch the whole video, this is a summary of the study tips that I'll be sharing throughout the video. I'll also be linking down some timestamps in the description below, so if you want to skip to any of these study tips, you may feel free to do so. So first up, I want to place an emphasis on starting strong. Studying for the A-levels is just a very short 2 years, so as you can see, it can be quite fast-paced. And if you let yourself fall behind, you may eventually snowball and you may find it difficult to catch up to the content that you need to. Also make sure that you are studying regularly and don't leave your work until the last minute. I know that a lot of students do this because of procrastination, but just really try your best to keep up and make sure you do your work before you have a chill time at home. To help yourself, perhaps you can try and do a to-do list so that you can write down the things that you need to do and make sure that you don't forget to do them. Next up, make sure that you are using your time wisely. This means that you should be studying smart, which I'll come to that a bit later, as well as keeping healthy both physically and mentally. So you should dedicate some time to exercising. And for mentally, you can just engage in your hobbies or just socialize with your friends. It is crucial that you understand that you should be unwinding when necessary. A-levels is kind of like a marathon and not a sprint. So if you try too hard at the start, you may eventually burn yourself out towards the end. And that's why I place another emphasis on don't leave your work until the last minute. Because if you actually do your stuff early on or during the day, you will have the time necessary to unwind yourself later at night. So things like watching YouTube or just playing some games, you will definitely find some time for you to do that. Also make sure you have a good sleep schedule. Personally for me, the day officially ends for me at about 10:30 to 11 p.m. where I'll start to unwind and eventually I'll sleep at about I think roughly 11:30 p.m. and wake up the next day about 6:30 a.m. for school. So this is like my basic kind of routine for my day-to-day life. And I try to stick to that schedule so that I don't really sacrifice on sleep since I will not have the energy to pay attention the next day. Next up, when your school provide notes, I'm quite sure they will also attach learning outcomes to it. As you can see here, this was the school notes that my school provided, and it clearly indicates the learning outcomes that the students need to accomplish. So this learning outcomes is a very good gauge of your understanding of the content. If you can truly accomplish all the learning outcomes, you will definitely know that you have a good mastery of the subject. So make sure that you will be formulating your notes with respect to it so that you can make sure that you cover all grounds when you make your notes for the particular subject. Next up, you should definitely remember the definitions of the chapter. So things like Newton's law, Coulomb's law, all these basic definitions are what you should remember for your exams. This is not only because they can be sometimes tested in your exams, whereby they will ask for the particular definition, but it is also because they are like the axioms of the chapter, the so-called building blocks. So if you understand all these basic laws and definitions, it will definitely help in solidifying your theory and understanding of the subject. Also, when you have any doubt, make sure you seek clarification as soon as possible. Don't let your doubts snowball such that it will eventually cause you confusion in the subject. So for example, let me refer you to this topic about Malu's law over here. Oops, over here. So basically, as my teacher was going through this on a lecture, I had some confusion about Malu's law as to why this was cosine theta. So when I had this confusion, I'll have wrote it down on my handout over here. And then after the lecture ends, I'll try to ponder about it a bit more and see if I can get an answer, and also just discuss with my friends. Eventually, if I still don't understand, I'll have went out to my tutor and he provided me an explanation about it. So this really cleared up my doubts about the subject. I don't erase this question away because sometimes I feel like if I revisit the content, I may actually sometimes forget like what is the actual answer. So I keep my questions and the answers staying there so that if next time I have the same gap in my knowledge, I can still refer back to this question and this explanation. I also make it a practice for me to write down the page where I have questions about so that I won't forget to resolve them. Next up, this is just a personal preference of mine, but I always prefer to use symbols rather than words, since I personally find them easier to digest. So let me use an example for you in this case, whereby it's about Coulomb's law, which states that the electric force between 2 point charges is directly proportional to the product of their charges and inversely proportional to the square of their separation. So when I read this whole thing right here, I find it like super long-winded. It would be nice if I can condense this through the use of symbols. So basically what I will do is I will change these point charges here to maybe Q1 and Q2. Directly proportional simply means this symbol and is their product, and it is also inversely proportional to the square of their separation. So example, let me call this R. So to sum up this whole Coulomb's law, it can just be simply written as electric force is directly proportional to Q1 times Q2 and is inversely proportional to the square of their separation. So I just find this right here a lot easier to condense my understanding compared to reading this super long-winded definition of Coulomb's law. Then for things like proton, electron, neutron, I also don't like reading things in word form, so I'll just use things like proton P with a plus on top, electron E with a minus, and neutron N, I'll put a zero on top, which stands for it is electrically neutral. So yeah, this is how I reduce like the number of words whenever possible. I use symbols to try and condense my understanding and make it also easier to digest. My next tip is for you to seek help when necessary or just study with your friends in general. If you really need to, please get the help that you need, and earlier the better, so it will not snowball and cause you confusion even further down the chapters that you will be studying. I think that a good way to implement this is to study with your friends. Your friends are the one that are usually more readily available, and it is also nice to have study companions alongside you throughout this A-level journey. As you study with your friends, overall you guys can help each other to explain stuff or explain concepts that others have difficulty on, and as a whole in your group, you can deepen your understanding of the subject. If you ever find yourself in like very deep loss and in need of serious help, you should definitely seek out your school tutor to see how he or she can help you. For me personally, I think I had quite a good physics teacher. I think he was like a typical physics teacher, like kind of quirky and a bit weird in a good way. But whenever I had any doubts on the subject, he would always find time for me to seek clarification with him. And his understanding of physics was really pretty good. Overall, I think with his guidance, it really helped to deepen my understanding of the subject. If you really find it quite unmanageable and you need like extra help, you may want to consider getting an extra tutor outside of school. For me personally, I didn't have an extra tuition outside of school because, well, firstly, I found it very expensive since I personally don't come from a very rich family. So I always strive to do well on the subject on my own. But from what I heard from my friends, some tutors outside are really good at their craft and they are also really good at de-escalating the subject so that it becomes very conceptually easy to understand. So I would say that if time isn't really on your side, but maybe it's like maybe 3 months to A levels and you need that extra last kick to help to push up your grades, maybe you want to consider getting an extra tutor. Next up, make sure that you prioritize the quality of your studying. So whenever you want to engage in a study session, make sure that you are focusing and put aside all your other distractions like your social media or your handphone. Personally, I use the Pomodoro method, which I think you can just search online. Basically, it's something about the 25 minutes of working and then 5 minutes of rest. Sorry for my bad handwriting. So overall, when you engage in the Pomodoro method, you have ample time for you to engage in your work and also some rest time. So that overall you can have this so-called consistency to keep on your study session. But as always, just find out whatever that works for you and stick to it. You don't need to force yourself to study like the whole day, the whole time. Make sure that you get the ample rest that you need to. Because like I said, A levels is a marathon, so-called, and not a sprint. So if you try too hard at the start, you may eventually burn yourself out. So for me personally, how I study, I will use the active recall and the spaced repetition method, which you can find in my previous videos. And when I engage in these two study techniques, I always make sure to have the learning outcomes in mind so that whatever content that I study, I make sure that I fulfill the needs of this chapter. Finally, make sure that you are always practicing your understanding. For me personally, when I use this active recall and spaced repetition, it's only for me to remember my content and not so much on how I'm going to apply my content. So I always try to apply my knowledge by doing questions, school papers, and practice papers. As for past year A-level papers, I feel that it's usually best done once you have finished all the content that you need for A-levels, which is usually like maybe I would say on average 3 to 6 months before A-levels based on your school. This is so that once you have solidified your understanding and actually have a understanding on all the subjects, you can actually use the opportunity well for you to test out your level of understanding on the actual A-level papers. So these are all the tips that I have to share regarding A-level physics. So overall, let me talk about my feelings regarding A-level physics. I definitely feel that it is a less memory intensive subject compared to subjects like chemistry or other humanities like geography and history, but you definitely still have some content to remember, which I will do via active recall and spaced repetition. While I think that I did decently well for my school life and A levels in general for physics, I definitely found it as a conceptually hard subject. When I first had my normal class tests that are not graded in JC, like my first few tests, I was scoring like 10 out of 20 to 11 out of 20. So like borderline passing grade. So it really came as quite a shock to me as to how hard A level physics really is. It really requires you to have thorough understanding of the subject. It's not something that you can just skim through and keep rereading and hope that you will do well in the subject. It really needs a lot of hard work. What I took away from physics is that if you don't understand something at the start, or no matter how long you have pondered about the subject and you still don't understand it, maybe you just need to try to use a different approach for you to see the subject. So maybe let's say this is the topic that you want to understand. You've been trying to understand it from this direction, but there are a lot of other directions for you to try and approach the topic that you want to understand. So what you have to do is you can always search out for different mental models to guide your understanding. It can be math equations, physics forums, videos, diagrams, your imagination, etc. Physics is definitely quite a tough subject, But if you seek to understand the subject conceptually, rather than just simply memorizing and regurgitating the information out, you should definitely be able to master the content quite well. I took the A levels in 2018, so that was like 3 years ago, but I believe all these fundamental studying principles will still stay the same. Hopefully you found this video useful, and if you think that you are already lagging behind, try to do your best and catch up, and use your time wisely. I hope you found this video useful, and thanks for watching. All the best. Bye bye.